Next, I'd like to introduce Councilmember Eduardo Martinez, who was elected to the Richmond City Council in 2014. He participated in the Well Untapped Fellowship Program Cohort 2017 to 2018. Let's welcome City of Richmond Councilmember Eduardo Martinez to the virtual stage.
Thank you. Thank you. My apologies if there's any internet problem. I've been having difficulties this morning, so hopefully we can get through this without more interruptions. But thank you, Alma, for that wonderful introduction. I'm thrilled to be here today to talk about this incredibly important topic, smart growth. For those of you who attended the Well Conference last year, you know we had a smart growth panel then as well. Because this topic is so important and relevant today, we thought it'd be good to check in on how smart growth planning has evolved. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to invite to the virtual stage our expert panels for today's discussions. First, we have Rich Constantine, who is mayor of the city of Morgan Hill. Welcome to the panel, Mayor Constantine. Next, we have Lamar Thorpe, council member and mayor-elect. Congratulations for the city of Antioch. Thank you for joining us, council member and mayor-elect member Thorpe. And then last but not least is Michelle Banonis. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Assistant Chief Deputy Director of the City Chief Deputy Director for the California Department of Water Resources. We're happy to have you here, Michelle. Now, to give everyone at the webinar today a sense of the schedule, I'm going to start by giving each panelist 8 minutes to present various smart growth topics and plans. From there, we'll jump into what will surely be a lively conversation, and then we'll wrap it up with some questions and answers from the audience. If any questions or comments come from you during the discussion, please feel free to type them out in the Q&A section on the right-hand side of your screen. With that, let's get started. Mayor Constantine, can we start with you?
Sure, and at this time I want to share my screen. Hit allow. All right, so I just want to show a quick intro video. Let's hope this works properly. Can everyone see it? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Can you guys hear that?
Hi, Rich. Unfortunately, we can't see your video. Or sorry, we can see it, but we can't hear it. Mayor Constantine, we are not able to hear your video.
Okay, so I guess you couldn't hear that. I just saw a chat, but you got a chance to see it. Can you all hear me? I see a nod. I see you, Lamar, but I don't see anybody else.
We can hear you.
Okay. Well, so you got to see the pictures at least get a little flavor of what Morgan Hill is. We are a city that is just 12 square miles with a population of just over 45,000. And we're at the southern end of Silicon Valley in Santa Clara County. Though we are in Silicon Valley, we are a very bucolic neighborhood, shall I say. And we get all our water from groundwater, which is kind of unique for some cities. 100% of our water is from groundwater, and we have a partnership with Valley Water. They are the supplier of all the water in Santa Clara County to our different municipalities. Now, we have our own water company and wastewater company, but we rely heavily on a reservoirs system that also supplies the water for our ground. Now, one of the things that we had to worry about was, and this was before my time on the council, was maintaining our water supply and making sure that we didn't outgrow it. And one of the things that we did to prevent that was we had to put in place a water ordinance, which mandates water usage during drought and non-drought years. So yes, it's in effect 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So even when we're not in a drought emergency, we do have water ordinances that limits the amount of water, tells people when they can water, how much they can water, and also whether or not they can use certain types of devices. And when we do have a drought emergencies, we do have different levels. We have levels 1 through 3. Level 1 emergency is when we have to reduce our water usage between 11 to 20%, all the way up to a water emergency, which would be level 3, which would include everything from you can't water your plants, you can't wash your cars and whatnot. So that would be in a case where we have to save more than 40% or greater in water reduction. But since this is a panel about smart growth in the face of water stress, we'll talk about our growth control measure. In Morgan Hill, we've had a growth control measure since 1977. Now, that doesn't only control the amount of homes that are being built, but it also helps us to develop a system that will allow us to have developers build smarter growth homes. In other words, in putting technology such as gray water systems, xeriscape landscaping, and things of that nature. So that helps us to not only limit the amount of homes that are built, but the type of homes that are built. And in our county, we've experienced about 20% growth, but our water usage has remained relatively flat. And that's due in no small part to our water conservation, our newer growth on how we build our homes. We take a whole basin approach, and what that means is we recognize, because I said we are a bucolic community, we recognize that there is a tension between water use for agriculture and water use for to serve our cities. So again, we work in partnership with Valley Water to work on our ground rate charges, and we try to keep those low for our farmers. But there, again, as I said, there is that tension. And we in the South County have more farming than they do in the North County. So there's always that competition because we pay lower rates because, one, we don't have the infrastructure, or we don't need the infrastructure to pipe water through, because as I said, our water is groundwater. So the Northern County, they pay more, they pay higher rates. So there's always that tension, that political tension. So we are continuing to push the expansion of resilient water supplies, which includes recycled water. As I said, we have our own water company and wastewater, but our wastewater goes down to our neighboring city of Gilroy, where our treatment plant is. And right now, we don't have the financial ability to put purple pipe into the ground to pipe it up to Morgan Hill, but we're working diligently to get that, because ultimately that's truly the only way that we're going to have an inexhaustible source of water. We're going to have to use our groundwater to a higher extent, and we're going to also need help from Sacramento when it comes, because right now we're not allowed to use recycled water to recharge our groundwater aquifers. So we're going to have to use the political realm as well. So I look forward to hearing more about the balancing of growth and water supplies from my colleagues here on the panel. Thank you very much. Please tell me you guys all heard that. This isn't like Zoom, although I would have had a background of our reservoir.
Right. Well, thanks so much, Rick. I have a lot of questions about your presentation, and you actually answered a lot of the questions that I had for you concerning the planning for conservation. So now it's time to listen to Council Member Thorpe. Thorpe, if you'd like to, please.
All right, hola. It's good to see you, Eduardo. My name is Lamar Thorpe. I'm a council member here in the city of Antioch, and as I like to say, the greatest city God ever created. And if you heard from our previous panelists, they talked about the Bay Delta and the hub being the Delta for California water supply and whatnot. Well, Antioch sits right in the middle of that. We are literally the break point between fresh water and salt water. So it's an interesting place to be, kind of in the at the epicenter of some of the impacts of climate change and of course some of the politics revolving water, particularly with the Department of Water Resources in the state of California and whatnot. So it's very exciting. Antioch is one of the oldest cities in California. We have pre-1914 water rights. That means we're the only city on the here in East Contra Costa County who pumps directly from the Delta. Everyone else in our county relies on Contra Costa Water District for their own water. That means we have a pretty expansive water distribution process here. So we manage over 339 miles of water mains. We have over 31,000 service connections. We have 2,300 backflow prevention devices and 3,400 fire hydrants throughout the city that we have to manage and maintain and upkeep. So that means we have a pretty we rely heavily on the ratepayers to fund this operation. And so we have about a $42 million, our city operating budget is about $160 million, and $43 million of that is from the Water Enterprise Fund that goes to oversee all of this. Contra Costa County has been one of those cities that has been growing pretty fast, particularly on its eastern part of the county, which is on the East Bay. We continue to grow. We've relied heavily on suburban sprawl and new single-family housing development. During the downturn or the housing crisis, it was cities like Antioch, Stockton, and Vallejo that really were the epicenter of the housing crisis here in California. And so we had a mortgage foreclosure crisis. It was a pretty difficult time. We literally, because we relied so heavily on the sales tax, depleted our police department. We depleted our most services from the city. We came to the brink of bankruptcy, but we were able to come out of that. And now we're doing pretty good. But that also means that we have to get smarter about how we develop in the city and not be so dependent on permitting fees for new development for future sources of revenue. We have a growth management measure as well. It's called our urban limit line, which the voters renewed recently. Prior to coming here, I lived in the state of Maryland, where we coined the phrase smart growth. So I'm pretty familiar with some of the things and concepts that are around smart growth. It was coined by our former governor, Glenn Denning. And so I've been happy to kind of bring those concepts to the city of Antioch. A few years, maybe about 2 years ago, we approved our first smart growth project, which of course focused on some of the older parts of our community and infill projects, and literally is of walking distance to our new BART station. And so we're pretty excited that it's of course livable, walkable. It provides affordability. I believe the starting price for new homes here in Antioch is in the north of 500,000, and that's at the lower end. But these new condos will be in the mid 200,000. So we're creating some level of affordability for folks. As we've grown, no one put much thought into aging infrastructure, and particularly as it revolved around water. And so now we're reaping some of the consequences of course, climate change and the politics of water policy in California. And so it makes it extremely challenging to provide water to residents at a reasonable cost. This year was the first time we did not raise water rates here in the city of Antioch. But it also, I'm not a fool. It comes there's going to be consequences as a result of that. That means there's some infrastructure that will not be replaced. There'll be some upkeep that will not be done. And, 339 miles of water mains is almost the length of driving to Los Angeles from my house. And so that's a lot of infrastructure that we have to upkeep. And the more suburban sprawl we've added to the city of Antioch, the more difficult we've made it in the long-term sustainability of the city. And so we recently, about a year ago, passed or redid our downtown specific plan, which focused more on high density and focused on really pushing development towards and around our Amtrak station. And we're working with Amtrak to develop new commuter lines so that folks can get into the Bay Area, into the inner core of the Bay Area and back to the suburbs where we're at a reasonable price. And so there's some concepts that we've adopted around smart growth, but there's a lot more that we have to do, particularly to protect our water resources. We recently approved the construction of a $72 million water desalination plant. So that's coming, and that will provide an additional 6 million gallons per day. We received a grant from DWR a few years ago that allowed us to begin this process. And we recently settled a lawsuit with DWR that in which they're paying us $23 million to finish the total project cost of this desalination plant. But new water sources are important, but I really believe that limiting growth and focusing on smart growth concepts where we're developing around major transportation hubs are going to be key for the sustainable future for places like Antioch. Just so you know, Antioch is the second largest city in our county. We have about 115,000 people, one of the most diverse communities in the Bay Area, and we're pretty excited about where we're headed and embracing these new concepts of smart growth. Well, they're old concepts, but they're new for us.
Thank you. Fascinating. As a matter of fact, it sounds like Antioch and Richmond have a lot in common. So
we have some in common, but we are the greatest city God ever created.
That's what I understand. But I think you're talking about the other side of the hill. Anyway, thanks so much. And Michelle, it's your turn. Feel free to come up and give your presentation.
Great. Thank you, Eduardo. Hi, all. I'm Michelle Banonis. I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully you will be able to see it. Can everyone see what's on my screen?
We can see it.
Excellent. Fantastic. Thank you. So I just want to thank you all for having me here today. Again, I'm Michelle. I'm with the California Department of Water Resources, and I'm the Assistant Chief Deputy Director. It's a really long title, but so just a quick primer, and I know that Tony was in your prior panel, so I won't belabor this, but DWR, our mission is to manage water resources for the benefit of people and the environment. And we are responsible for the continued operation of the state water project and to ensure public safety, such as that related to dams and flood protection and for preserving the environment for future generations. So when I was sort of thinking related to this presentation, sort of about the large umbrella that's sort of served in a broader statewide context in relation to smart growth and sort of overarching state initiatives interrelated with local and regional growth, I thought it would be really worth kind of expounding on the topics of climate change resiliency, drought preparedness, urban water management, and aging infrastructure, which I know was discussed in the last presentation as well. So I will try not to belabor that point for you. First, I think it's really important to touch on Governor Newsom's water resilience portfolio. It was released on July 28th. There are a lot of topics that would likely be of interest to well members, and if you haven't looked through it, I'd highly recommend it. I think there are a lot of components in the portfolio that are germane to smart growth, and I've provided a link on this slide, but I can provide this link to anybody who needs it as well, and hopefully, these will be posted so you can just click and go right there. So the portfolio is really the administration's water policy roadmap for equipping California to cope with more extreme droughts and floods, rising temperatures, declining fish populations, over-reliance on groundwater, and a whole host of other challenges. So the portfolio contains 142 separate actions to be taken by state agencies, and together they're intended to support California's diverse regions as they safeguard water supplies for communities and natural systems. State agencies are intending to track and share the progress on the portfolio implementation with an annual report and ongoing stakeholder engagement. So next, I really want to touch on climate change and drought preparedness. I think, I've heard this from the folks even on this panel. I caught the tail end of the last panel. This is obviously something that's, just staring us in the face. So we've been doing a lot of work at DWR to learn from extreme weather events and using it to better plan for future events. So we know that climate extremes will be ever increasing. And as we think how to prepare our communities for the years ahead, I think there are some key takeaways, not only for a statewide perspective, but for regional and local preparedness efforts. And, in relation to drought, I think this first bullet, act as soon as you can when conditions turn dry. It's important not to start to wait for impacts to occur before you start your response actions. So from an urban perspective, I think what's really important, one of the things we learned at DWR from the last severe drought period, was that there shouldn't be an assumption that emergency water conservation will solve the problem. And so that kind of leads into the next bullet. Water suppliers really need to have an adequate portfolio of water supplies before the drought hits. And that portfolio really needs to include a factor of safety for unexpected conditions. So this is really important. And I know a lot of folks are really actively looking to do this. They're trying to come up with different sources, different supplies, backup supplies. I think that's really good. I think folks are really starting to kind of look into the crystal ball and sort of predict these things. And and I'd like to see more of that effort. And I know, again, we at the state level are trying to do the same. So next, we saw intensified effects of climate change since the last drought. As everybody here is well aware, the biggest was the wildfire risk. And increased wildfire risk means danger to communities, but it's also danger to water infrastructure itself. So that's really important to think about. Another item that we've been dealing with at the state are harmful algal blooms. And I know, folks probably have also dealt with that. This is something we always haven't needed to plan for as much in the past, and it's more prevalent due to climatic changes. So I think when we start thinking about climate change, it's important to think about all these items in a multi-hazard planning approach when thinking about the expansion of communities. So next, you need lead time for drought preparedness and drought response. It's really important that local agencies think about capital outlay projects that would improve drought resilience. So if, for example, in times of drought, state drought assistance funds become available, there are shovel-ready projects that money can be allotted to. That's good for the state, that's good for you, just something to really kind of keep in your back pocket as you're planning. And then finally, we do need to do some thinking on current legislation or existing legislation, as it were, to see if it makes sense. So for example, we have SB 221 and SB 610 that require local land use agencies that approve new developments of 500 plus units. Those agencies need to verify that water supplies are available to serve those developments. The law is almost 20 years old now. I think it's 19. So the question is, should we revisit that based on what we learned in the most recent drought? and with our current understanding of climate change science or not. So I think these are really big questions we need to be thinking about as we prepare. Urban water management, I won't go into all of these details on this particular slide, but I think it's important to note that DWR is working on a guidebook. So our urban water management plans, I'm sure a lot of folks on this conference are familiar with it, but they're prepared by urban suppliers every 5 years, and that's required by the water code. So these are intended to support resource planning to ensure that water supplies are available to meet, future 20-year horizon needs. So every urban supplier that provides over 3,000 acre-feet annually or serves more than 3,000 urban connections is required to submit an urban water management plan. So based primarily on some legislation that came down in 2018, DWR has been working on a guidebook, and that guidebook was put together and circulated earlier this year. So the purpose of the guidebook is to provide support and tools for water suppliers who are developing these plans. Some of the notable inclusions in the guidebook include what's mentioned here. And again, I'm not going to go through all of these, and I can point you in the right direction of any experts if you'd like to discuss this further. Certainly happy to do that. I would say that the comment period for the guidebook closed, or the draft guidebook closed on September 28th. So DWR is continuing to review comments, and we will release a final guidebook for public review later this year. So finally, again, I'm not going to go into all the gory details of aging infrastructure because I know, again, you've talked about it, but I think, I think it's such a broad topic area and it impacts such a huge swath of our communities that it really is worth mentioning. And you might have talked about this in the prior panel, but many of DWR's dams and conveyance facilities were built in the 60s. And as we've learned from experience, a 60s level of engineering may not be adequate for today's standards, or maybe something built in the 60s, it just ain't what it used to be. So this is really something we need to consider when thinking about community expansion. Will the infrastructure that's provided reliable supplies for the past, 50 to 60 years still be as reliable in the future? Will it still be there and providing the same level of benefit? Is there a backup plan? And this goes not only for water supply, but also for flood control structures. And that's the really important thing to think about too, is, we've got aging levees, as communities are expanded, is that going to be a risk for folks if, communities expand out? So really something to consider. And you can read more about this. We have a strategic plan, DWR does, and we have been updating it and, reporting out on milestones that have been met. I think the other thing to really mention here, and it's kind of embedded in the last bullet, is, we're really thinking now in a different way, more broadly about multi-benefit projects. So for example, we've been undertaking a lot of work where we're not only providing flood system improvements, but also ecosystem benefits as well. So, floodplain expansion, it allows more ability to maybe improve a levee, but also provide some habitat benefit in between. And so we've really been looking at those kinds of projects as we've been thinking about the future and kind of, creating a synergistic approach to, our infrastructure improvements. And finally, communication. It's a new era, and we need to focus on how we share information and public awareness and enhance our overall emergency preparedness, both internally and externally. So I think those are my key takeaways. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen. So thank you. I think you're on mute, Eduardo.
Yeah, I saw that. Sorry. Anyway, thanks to all of you for your presentations. So if the rest of you can unmute and reveal yourselves with your cameras, we can kick into the discussions for a few questions. I noticed on the questions that there was questions about the California water fix, which seems to be a major topic. And on your presentation, I saw that there was problems with declining fish populations and over-reliance on water. So I was wondering if there was a matrix that you used or are using to equalize the problem of declining fish populations and the overuse of water.
So I don't know that there's necessarily a matrix per se. I would say one of the really beneficial things about the governor's portfolio is it kind of lays them out in a broader context under the umbrella of greater stakeholder engagement. I think, you know, I just being frank, I think in the past, I wouldn't say the recent past, but the past, you know, I don't know that the level of transparency has always been there. And I think that that's something we're really striving for, to enhance transparency, get folks in the community engaged in these overarching, you know, broad, you know, ecosystem community-based sort of programs to make sure that, you know, what we're doing is not just good for the agency that's implementing it, but good for the communities as well. So this is really, I think, a good step forward with the water resiliency portfolio. I think this is something that's trying to look at everything and not necessarily saying this is more important than this. It's not doing that, but what it's trying to do is, I think, you know, kick to these broader community processes to try to like create more engagement, get more people involved, and really kind of use that as a forum to move projects forward. So that would be my response to that.
Okay, thank you. And to Mayor-elect Thorpe, what's your opinion on the California water fix?
I think it goes without saying. We're a Delta city, a Delta Bay Area city. So, you know, we still, I can only speak to the previous water fix. I'm not well versed on this newest plan, but just in that overview that we got earlier, it just seemed like they moved the intake further up north to Sacramento and are going to build a larger pipe or tunnel or whatever it may be. But I'm not too familiar, so I can't speak on that. But, you know, our position has always remained the same. We think that diverting water from the Delta is dangerous, and it makes it very difficult for us. When I was talking about climate change and the politics of Sacramento, that's exactly what I was talking about, is that we're impacted by those decisions. And if the less water we have coming through the Delta, pushing back salt water makes it difficult for us to pump water. And so from that perspective, you know, I think we pretty much have the same perspective, irrespective of what type of land use policy we have, because at that point it's not about the infrastructure, it's about whether or not we can pump water.
Well, it seems like you're making plans for it because you're putting in a desalination plant.
So that's for brackish water, and so the more salination, the more difficult it becomes so it's about the level of salination.
Mm-hmm.
And so
okay. That's I think that's important for everyone to know. Okay, and for the two city people, sewage lines impact groundwater. And I've heard that your sewage lines need work. So what are your plans for dealing with the sewage lines and how it impacts the groundwater? So,
was that for me?
And for Thorpe.
So I'm not sure where you heard that our sewer lines need work. We've in the last 10 years have redoubled our efforts into replacing our water lines, our supply lines, and our sewage line. We did have a sewer spill, shall we say, when we had a rainstorm a couple of years ago that impacted the residents of San Martin, which is an unincorporated area between Morgan Hill and Gilroy. But once that was, and that was due to infiltration. You know, it's hard. A sewer system is supposed to be a closed system. But when we had the rains that we had, it infiltrated the system and overflowed the system, and then there was a breach. But we don't really have a concern too much with our infrastructure. As I said, we've been in the process of replacing the water, but I want to go back if I could, because I wanted to get on that soapbox on the water fix, because it's not a fix. It should be called the water Band-Aid. The soapbox that I want to get on is the soapbox of recycled water. We need to use recycled water more. It's mind-boggling to me that the only time we talk about recycled water is when we're in a drought. But once the rain starts and we're not talking about shortage of water, the recycled water goes out the window. I know it's expensive, and that's what I've been told many times. But it's an inexhaustible source of water. And I don't mean to be crass, but if you flush the toilet, you're gonna have water, and we need to be able to reuse that. That's really the only way. That's the only true fix that we're going to be able to sustain the growth that we're going to have in California with the water usage.
Okay, Lamar.
So we really haven't relied heavily on groundwater here in Antioch, but we have begun the process for the regional groundwater management plan and integrating all these different agencies. So I'm still learning a lot more about that. But in terms of our wastewater lines, we'll see some improvements as a result of the desalination plant, because we'll be building new pipeline to support the brine, which is the brine that comes out of that comes out of the process of desalination, and so there will be some new infrastructure to our wastewater agency. So that's all I have to say about that.
All right. Question for Mr. Constantine, Mayor Constantine. I got a question that says Watsonville groundwater is depleting. How are you maintaining your groundwater level? I heard you say that.
Well, our groundwater. I'm sorry. So our groundwater is managed by Valley Water. They're the organization that we work closely with in all 15 cities of Santa Clara County work with to manage our water. Much of our water to replenish our aquifers are purchased from other areas and piped in. We do have a reservoir, our main reservoir, which is Anderson Reservoir. It's here in Morgan Hill. But as I said, our water is groundwater, so we do not directly get water from Anderson Dam. It is actually used to supply San Jose and other cities to the north. But some of that water is also used to recharge our groundwater. But it's not enough for the